Every man hungers for strength, yet most starve at the doorstep of their own weakness. In this video, we dissect why the majority remain conquerable, while a rare few forge themselves into men who cannot be defeated. If you are tired of being predictable, manipulable, and breakable, then listen closely. History does not remember the agreeable, the compliant, or the easily bent. It remembers the men who carved themselves into instruments of will. The ones who transformed their vulnerabilities into weapons. The ones who understood that to survive and to dominate, one must become more than merely disciplined. One must become sovereign over himself. In this lesson, we explore the hunger that devours the weak and sharpens the strong. The relentless desire to become a man whose downfall cannot be engineered by any adversary. Prepare yourself, for we walk into the territory where psychology meets strategy, where human nature is stripped of its illusions, and where the truth becomes a blade. This is not a guide for the faint or the idealistic, but for those who wish to rise beyond defeat. There is a truth most men refuse to confront. Strength is not born from desire, but from deprivation. You may claim you want to be formidable, disciplined, respected, even feared, but do you hunger for the trials required to earn such stature? Consider the legions of Rome, hardened not by comfort, but by marches that shredded their feet. A soldier who endured such torment needed no reassurance of his strength. He carried proof carved into his own endurance. Ask yourself what has carved itself into you. Weak men speak often of potential. They imagine what they could be if only circumstances aligned, if only time, fortune, and opportunity cooperated. Yet fortune does not respect the idle dreamer. She favors the man who enters conflict already acquainted with struggle. The difference between the conqueror and the conquered often lies not in talent but in the unseen battles each man forces upon himself. When was the last time you chose a difficulty that no one required of you? When was the last time you starved yourself of ease to test the sharpness of your will? If you cannot answer, you already know the verdict. In every court, every marketplace, every household throughout history, manipulators thrived by preying on the untested. They did not need sharper minds, only weaker opponents. A man who has never confronted internal adversity collapses under strategic pressure. His emotions betray him. His hunger for validation betrays him. His addiction to comfort betrays him. It is easy to bend such a man. He reveals everything because he cannot tolerate tension. He rushes to please because uncertainty terrifies him. And so he becomes useful to others, but never sovereign over himself. Does this resemble anyone you know? Perhaps, if you are honest, it resembles the man you once were. To cultivate dangerous resilience, you must invert the logic of ordinary men. While they avoid discomfort, you must pursue it. While they seek applause, you must seek solitude. While they chase pleasure, you must chase pressure. This is the strategic hunger that defined the most unshakable leaders in history. They trained themselves to endure what would break their rivals. Think of Hannibal crossing the Alps while lesser commanders waited for spring. Think of the generals who marched through Fan so their enemies believed them superhuman. The undefeatable man is not born from victory. He is forged through private suffering that no adversary can replicate. Modern life offers countless opportunities for this self-imposed hardening, yet few seize them. You do not need mountains or battlefields. You need only resolve. When someone insults you, resist the urge to react. The silence you endure becomes armor. When your body seeks comfort, deny it for a moment longer. The tension you embrace becomes discipline. When you fear confrontation, step toward it instead of away. The unease you swallow becomes power. With every deliberate discomfort, you strengthen the inner fortress from which all dominance flows. The question is not whether you can do this. The question is whether you will. Understand this. The man who has learned to endure internal adversity becomes psychologically untouchable. Manipulators lose their tools. They cannot provoke you because you do not fear friction. They cannot lure you because you do not crave ease. They cannot guilt you because your self-worth is not negotiated with others. In the absence of these vulnerabilities, their strategies collapse. They are left grasping at shadows, attempting to control a man who does not flinch. Have you noticed how predators retreat the moment they encounter someone who is not moved by their usual tactics? They sense danger in the calm. They sense unpredictability in the quiet. But the path toward becoming such a man is solitary. No applause follows you. No reward is guaranteed. You become your own judge, jury, and executioner, destroying the weaknesses you discover and constructing strength in their place. This is why so few ascend to this level. They cannot tolerate the silence of self-confrontation. They cannot endure the friction of growth. But if you can, the world becomes astonishingly manageable. Fewer conflicts intimidate you. Fewer people manipulate you. Fewer setbacks destabilize you. You move through life with the quiet confidence of someone who has already fought himself and won. To impose hardship upon yourself is to take command of the very battlefield where most men surrender without a fight. Self-imposed hardening is not a ritual of suffering. It is a calculated strategy to sculpt your will into something unbreakable. Look at the rulers who shaped history. They understood that authority does not come from crowns or title, but from the discipline to govern oneself before governing others. Ask yourself, can you command anyone if you cannot command your impulses? Can you lead if you are dragged by every craving and comfort? The man who conquers himself gains a strength no adversary can counterfeit. Consider the generals who trained their bodies and minds long before battle. Their enemies prepared for war, they prepared for hardship. This distinction is everything. A soldier who expects comfort collapses the moment chaos arrives. A soldier who has rehearsed discomfort greets chaos as a familiar companion. The same law governs your life. When you deny yourself the indulgences that weaken other men, you sharpen your instincts. You become alert, calculating, capable of enduring hours, days, even seasons that would break the undisciplined. Tell me, when pressure rises, do you retreat into distraction, or do you remain present enough to shape the outcome? Self-imposed hardening is not asceticism for its own sake. It is a weapon of psychological warfare. When you set rigorous standards for yourself, you raise the cost for anyone who attempts to control you. For example, the manipulator who tries to lure you with flattery fails if you have trained yourself to operate without praise. The tempter who offers pleasure loses influence if you have learned to function without indulgence. The aggressor who attempts to provoke you discovers only silence because you have practiced restraint until it becomes instinct. Ask yourself, how much leverage would others lose over you if you no longer needed what they offered? History praises rulers who could endure more than those they govern. Even tyrants feared men who displayed an unusual tolerance for discomfort, because such men were impossible to bribe, intimidate, or corrupt. Think of the advisors who outlasted palace intrigues simply because they could withstand long periods of uncertainty without begging for clarity. Their patience was their shield. Their quiet suffering concealed their strength. Meanwhile, their rivals betrayed themselves through desperation. So examine yourself when you feel deprived of attention, affection, certainty. Do you maintain composure, or do you reveal your fears? The man who reveals nothing cannot be cornered. Modern life seduces you with comforts that appear harmless, but slowly drain your will. Every time you reach for ease instead of effort, you surrender a fragment of your autonomy. But when you impose challenges on yourself, rising earlier than necessary, refusing distractions, choosing the difficult conversation, pushing your limits just beyond the point of convenience, you send a message to your own mind that you are the one in command. This message accumulates. It becomes identity, and identity becomes fate. Ask yourself honestly, would your enemies prefer you weak, indulgent, predictable? If so, why would you give them exactly what they desire? Self-imposed hardening also exposes who truly holds power over you. When you temporarily deny yourself something, observe your reaction. Do you feel anxious without entertainment, restless without affirmation, unstable without routine? These reactions are signals revealing the chains you carry. Break them through deliberate challenge, and your independence grows. Your focus sharpens. You become the kind of man whose presence unsettles the weak, because you radiate a discipline they cannot imagine practicing. But do not deceive yourself. This path is demanding. It asks you to confront the truth of who you are before becoming who you claim to be. Yet understand this: mastery over yourself does not end with discipline. It merely prepares the ground for a more formidable transformation. Once you prove that you can endure hardship by choice, you must confront the deeper challenge, whether you can wield that discipline strategically, bending your environment and your adversaries through the quiet authority of your will. For the man who is unmoved by pressure becomes capable of exerting pressure without effort. And that is where true power begins. But before you wield it, you must learn to control something more volatile: your emotions. Now, to master emotional silence is to seize control of the arena where most men sabotage themselves: anger, fear, envy, Wounded pride. These are the strings by which manipulators pull their victims. Yet the man who disciplines his emotional reactions becomes as unreadable as a statue carved from cold marble. He does not reveal his inner landscape. He does not display weakness. He does not grant his enemies the comfort of knowing what stirs him. Consider the rulers who survived treacherous courts. They spoke little, observed much, and allowed no one to decipher their true intention. Ask yourself how many conflicts in your life were lost not through action, but through emotional exposure. How many adversaries learned your vulnerabilities because you displayed them freely? If a man's face becomes a window into his state of mind, he invites intrusion. If his face becomes a mask, he invites caution. In the courts of Florence, a single flinch could be as revealing as a confession. The advisor who widened his eyes, the general who tightened his jaw, the noble who shifted nervously, all exposed themselves without uttering a word. And once exposed, they were predictable. A predictable man is easily manipulated. A predictable man is easily trapped. Emotional silence, however, transforms you into a puzzle. When you do not react to insult, the insulter feels uncertain. When you do not crumble under pressure, the scammer feels disadvantaged. When you do not reveal excitement, the negotiator cannot leverage your desires. Reflect on your daily life. How often do people extract information from your expressions rather than your words? The sigh of frustration, the flash of irritation, the quick tone of eagerness, each of these reactions is a surrender. The disciplined man surrenders nothing. Imagine a scenario. Someone provokes you in a meeting, hoping you will lash out and justify their accusation. Instead, you remain silent, steady, expressionless. Their strategy collapses. Or consider the manipulative friend who pushes your emotional buttons, seeking guilt or compliance. When their usual hooks find no purchase, they grow anxious, even desperate. They realize something dangerous. You cannot be controlled through emotion. The moment you stop feeding reactions to others, you shift the balance of power. Those who once targeted you now second-guess themselves. Those who sought to dominate you become wary. Emotional silence is not passivity. It is calculated restraint. It forces others to reveal themselves while you reveal nothing. Ask yourself, is there any weapon more efficient than one that makes your enemies expose their motives voluntarily? Throughout history, the strongest leaders were those who understood that emotion, once visible, could be exploited. A ruler who showed irritation invited rebellion. A commander who showed fear inspired desertion. A negotiator who showed desperation guaranteed disadvantage. By controlling their emotional expression, they forced rivals to act blindly. You must adopt the same principle. When someone insults you, remain unmoved. When someone flatters you, remain neutral. When someone pressures you, remain calm. Your silence denies them the feedback they crave. It denies them the sense of superiority they seek. It denies them the tactical information they need. Observe how predators behave when prey stops running. Their instincts falter. Their confidence weakens. Similarly, your emotional silence disrupts the psychological patterns of those who rely on manipulation to feel powerful. They do not know whether you are confident, indifferent, or preparing a counterstrike. That uncertainty becomes your shield. But emotional silence is not merely about withholding reactions. It is about directing your energy inward. When you resist the impulse to react, you gain clarity. You begin to see the true shape of situations that emotion once distorted. You recognize motives more quickly. You detect lies more easily. You perceive threats before they escalate. Silence sharpens perception. It heightens strategy. It transforms you from a participant to an observer, and from an observer to a tactician. Once you reach that point, something remarkable happens. Others start mirroring your silence, adjusting their behavior around you, treating you with cautious respect. The predator becomes contemplative. The manipulator becomes hesitant. The loud become careful. And you become dangerous. But understand this: emotional silence is only one layer of psychological mastery. Once others can no longer read your reactions, the next challenge emerges, ensuring they cannot predict your actions either. To become a man others cannot predict is to deprive them of the most valuable resource in conflict: certainty. Predictability is a luxury only the powerless can afford. Every pattern you display, every routine you cling to, every emotional reflect you reveal, these become blueprints that others use to control you. Your predictability grants them a map to your weaknesses. Your unpredictability erases that map and forces them to navigate in the dark. Ask yourself, how many times have you been cornered simply because someone knew how you would react? And more importantly, how many times could you have reversed the outcome if you had acted against expectation instead? History is rich with examples of leaders who used unpredictability as a weapon. Consider the campaigns of the barbarian chieftains who struck at dawn one day, vanished for weeks the next, and returned at night when their enemies believed them miles away. Their unpredictability shattered superior armies because fear grows exponentially in the absence of foresight. Or examine the rulers who kept their courts, guessing, never revealing who they trusted, whom they suspected, or whom they intended to reward. This uncertainty preserved their power, for when no one can anticipate your moves, no one can conspire effectively against you. Reflect on your own life. How many people know your habits so well that they can manipulate you with ease? The friend who knows how to provoke your guilt. The coworker who knows when you will break your silence. The rival who knows your pride will push you into a trap. Predictability is a leash. A man who longs for independence must break it. Unpredictability is not chaos, it is deliberate ambiguity. It is the art of choosing actions not based on impulse, but based on the advantage they conceal. Imagine a manipulator who attempts to provoke you, expecting outrage. Instead, you respond with calm indifference one day, sharp assertiveness the next, and complete silence the day after. They cannot form a reliable pattern. They cannot prepare a strategy. They cannot anchor their tactics. Their power dissolves. Or consider the negotiator who expects desperation from you. Instead, you appear dispassionate, then firm, then seemingly disinterested in the entire arrangement. They begin to doubt their assumptions. They begin to overthink every word you speak. Their confidence erodes. When others cannot predict you, they become cautious. When they become cautious, you gain advantage. Ask yourself, why make it easy for others to calculate you? There is a reason spies, strategists, and rulers of old concealed their intentions even from allies. They knew a truth that remains relevant today. The moment others can anticipate your thoughts, they can begin to shape them. A predictable man is the easiest to deceive. He reacts the same way under the same pressure. He chases the same pleasures. He avoids the same fears. And because he is consistent, he is vulnerable. But the unpredictable man breaks patterns deliberately. He keeps his adversaries shifting between guessing and doubting. He bends the psychological environment around him, making others reactive while he remains steady. If you observe closely, you will notice that unpredictable individuals command a peculiar respect. People tread lightly around them. They measure their words. They hesitate before challenging them. You can cultivate that same effect by altering your rhythms, your responses, your availability, and your expression. Consider this scenario. Someone tries to undermine you publicly. If you lash out, they win. If you retreat, they win again. But if you respond with an unexpected calmness, perhaps even a faint, enigmatic smile, you introduce uncertainty. They do not know whether you are amused, indifferent, or preparing a counterstrike. That uncertainty becomes a psychological chokehold. Or imagine someone tries to manipulate you through emotional closeness. If you respond predictably with warmth, they gain leverage. If you respond unpredictably with controlled distance today and measured attention tomorrow, they cannot anchor their strategy. They hesitate. They recalculate. And in that recalculation, they lose power. Unpredictability is not about being erratic. It is about being unreadable. It is the deliberate crafting of an identity that others cannot fully grasp. You become a shadow in a world of transparent men, a puzzle in a world of open books, a variable in a world of constants. And once you reach this point, something remarkable happens. People begin to fear misjudging you. They step carefully. They reveal more than they intend. They try to earn clarity from you, not extract it. But unpredictability is only half the battle. To complete your transformation, you must also detach yourself from the very things others use to bind you down. To practice psychological distance is to reclaim your sovereignty from the forces that quietly try to own you. Attachment, when unexamined, becomes a chain. Expectations become shackles. Approval becomes a leash placed gently around your neck. And the tragedy is that most men tighten these restraints themselves refusing to admit how easily they are swayed by the judgments of others. Ask yourself how much of your identity is built on the reactions of those around you. How often do you bend your choices to keep the peace, preserve image, or avoid disappointing someone who holds no real authority over your destiny? Throughout history, rulers fell not because their enemies were powerful, but because they were too attached to something that enemies could threaten. A king obsessed with reputation becomes vulnerable to rumor. A general desperate for loyalty becomes manipulable through flattery. A leader who craves love becomes blind to betrayal. The moment others discover what you cannot bear to lose, they discover precisely how to control you. Consider the countless conspirators who never needed armies. They only needed to manipulate a ruler's fear of disgrace, loneliness, or abandonment. Tell me, what would others use to bend you, if they wish to? Psychological distance is not detachment from life. It is detachment from dependence. It is the deliberate decision to prevent any person, institution, or desire from having unquestioned authority over your state of mind. When you no longer require validation, praise, or reassurance, you become immune to manipulation by those who weaponize these comforts. Imagine someone attempting to guilt you into compliance. If your sense of worth is internal, their tactic collapses. Or picture someone trying to lure you with admiration. If you do not need their applause, their influence dissolves. Distance frees you from invisible strings. Consider the man who is terrified of losing a relationship. He becomes obedient, overly agreeable, easy to manipulate. His fear becomes the lever by which others move him. But the man who practices psychological distance cares deeply yet clings to nothing. He understands that affection is meaningful only when it is not demanded at the cost of his integrity. Or take the employee who fears losing his job. His anxiety makes him exploitable, his compliance becomes predictable. But the man with distance maintains readiness to walk away, not out of recklessness, but out of sovereignty. People respect him because they cannot control him. Distance also sharpens perception. When you are not emotionally entangled, you see motives more clearly. You detect manipulation faster. You recognize when someone's kindness is strategic rather than sincere. Most men are blinded by their attachments. They mistake dependency for loyalty and desire for destiny. But when your identity is not tied to any person's approval, you become capable of evaluating relationships, opportunities, and threats with cold accuracy. You begin to ask, does this serve my long-term strength, or does it merely satisfy a temporary longing? That question alone separates the sovereign from the enslaved. But the highest form of psychological distance is the willingness to lose what others fear losing: reputation, comfort, approval, familiarity. When you stop begging life to stay the same, you gain the power to shape it. Others become cautious around a man who is not afraid to walk away from a job, from a negotiation, from a relationship, even from an identity that no longer serves him. They realize he cannot be cornered. They recognize that nothing they offer or withhold can govern him. And in that moment, he becomes dangerous in a way that is both subtle and undeniable. Yet understand this. Distance is not coldness but clarity. It is the art of preserving your center when the world tries to claim it. When you no longer fear loss, you stop behaving like a hostage and begin acting like a strategist. This transformation unsettles people, for they cannot imagine a man who stands complete without permission. They sense that you cannot be bribed with affection, coerced with guilt, or steered with insecurity. And when a man reaches that point, he becomes something rare, someone others cannot use. But there remains one final layer of invincibility: seeing human nature without illusion. That vision grants you decisive power today. To see human nature without illusion is to strip away the stories people tell about themselves and confront the machinery beneath their actions. Most men prefer comforting myths that others are guided by honor, loyalty, empathy, or reason. But history teaches a colder truth: people are guided by self-interest first, fear second, and convenience always. If you cling to the fantasy that others possess the same motives you claim to hold, you walk into every interaction unarmed. Ask yourself, how many times have you been disappointed simply because you expected someone to behave nobly? And how many of those disappointments could have been avoided if you had viewed their nature as it truly was, not as you wished it to be? Consider the courts of old, where flattery was currency and betrayal a daily sport. Advisors smiled while sharpening daggers. Generals pledged loyalty while negotiating with rivals. Allies swore eternal friendship while quietly preparing escape routes. None of this was surprising to the rulers who survived. They expected duplicity. They anticipated ambition. They understood that a man's outward virtue often concealed his inward hunger, and because they expected the worst, they were never caught off guard when it arrived. Reflect on your own life. How often do you assume sincerity where there is strategy? How often do you mistake politeness for loyalty and attention for affection? Delusion is a cage. Clarity is liberation. Seeing human nature clearly does not require cynicism, it requires observation. Watch how people behave when no praise can be earned. Watch how they act when no punishment awaits. Watch their reactions when they believe you have nothing to offer them. In those moments, masks slip. The friend who disappears when you are no longer useful reveals their truth. The colleague who suddenly becomes warm when you gain influence reveals theirs. People expose themselves constantly, yet most never notice because they judge through emotion instead of evidence. Ask yourself, when someone flatters you, do you analyze their motive, or do you surrender to the sweetness of their words? When someone criticizes you, do you evaluate the truth, or do you allow wounded pride to cloud your judgment? There is a reason great strategists studied human weakness as closely as they studied geography. A city's walls can be measured, but a man's intentions must be inferred. A ruler who understood fear could move armies without lifting a sword. A commander who understood pride could manipulate allies into making fatal decisions. A negotiator who recognized desperation could extract impossible concessions. The same principles govern your personal life. A manipulator studies your emotions. A liar studies your hopes. A rival studies your insecurities. But when you study human nature with equal scrutiny, you reverse the advantage. Their tactics become transparent. Their games become predictable. Their power evaporates the moment you understand the foundation of their behavior. Imagine someone tries to guilt you, claiming you have disappointed them. If you understand human nature, you ask, do they seek genuine resolution or control? Someone expresses admiration, do they desire connection or influence? Someone pressures you to commit quickly, do they fear losing you or fear losing leverage? The man who perceives motives beneath words possesses a decisive advantage. He never reacts blindly. He never accepts narratives at face value. He never confuses performance with sincerity. Others begin to sense this clarity and grow cautious around him, for they recognize a dangerous truth. He sees them, perhaps more clearly than they see themselves. But to see human nature honestly, you must also confront your own, your desires, your pride, your fears, your hunger for validation. These are the handles by which others would control you. When you deny your impulses the power to cloud judgment, you begin to perceive not only the world, but yourself without distortion. And once you understand your own weaknesses, you can predict how others with similar weaknesses will behave. Human nature becomes a map, not a mystery. A weapon, not a puzzle. A guide, not a threat. When you achieve this perspective, you no longer face people as individuals with unpredictable intentions. You face patterns, instincts, and timeless tendencies. You understand that betrayal often grows from opportunity, that loyalty often grows from benefit, and that fear shapes decisions more reliably than logic. With this vision, manipulation becomes obvious, deception becomes transparent, and power dynamics become readable. Yet clarity alone is not the end of the journey, because once you can read human nature, the final question emerges: what will you do with that knowledge? Will you merely observe, or will you wield it? Will you use it for defense, or for dominance? The answer waits in the next step. In the end, the true art of influence is not loud, nor violent, nor announced with grand displays. It is subtle. It is the gentle pressure that feels like a choice someone believes they made themselves. You understand now that control does not come from force. It comes from anticipation, from knowing what people fear, what they desire, and what they cannot resist, revealing in their moments of weakness. Most will never notice the quiet hand guiding their steps. They rarely question the path, only the destination, and by then, it is too late to ask who placed the stones beneath their feet. But here is the question you must confront. Will you use this knowledge to guard yourself from manipulation, or to shape the world before others shape you? Reflect on it. Interrogate your own motives. Power favors the one who understands the game, even if they never boast of playing it. Now I want to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment. Your perspective sharpens the conversation. Subscribe if you want more strategic insights delivered with the same clarity and edge. And share this video with someone who believes influence must be loud. Let them discover how quiet power truly operates.